You're curious about moving to the Costa del Sol. It's one of the most talked about regions in Spain. Sunshine, vibrant communities, that Mediterranean lifestyle. It sounds like the dream, right? But here's something a lot of people don't realize. The Costa del Sol, it's not just one place. You know, on Instagram or Google Maps, it might look like one long sunny coastline, but on the ground, it's a very different story. There isn't just one vibe or one look or one lifestyle. The Costa del Sol is a surprisingly varied stretch of coastline with some parts that aren't even on the coast. And depending on where you end up, your day-to-day life could look very different. So if you're seriously considering this area, or if you've already written it off, I think it's worth digging a little deeper, because understanding the variety here is key to understanding the region's potential. That's why I decided to do something I hadn't done before. Travel the full length of the Costa del Sol all in one go. Over 5 days, we covered more than 150 kilometers from one end to the other, stopping in well-known towns and some lesser-known inland spots to get a feel for the different places and lifestyles this region offers. And in this video, I want to share the 7 key takeaways from that trip. If the Costa del Sol is on your radar, this will help you move forward with more clarity. And even if it's not, some of the practical advice I'll be sharing can apply anywhere in Spain. If you don't know me, I'm James Blick, the founder of Spain Revealed. I've lived in Spain for 14 years, where I built 2 businesses. I have my beautiful family here, and I've helped hundreds of people move to Spain the right way. I do that through a proven system that combines step-by-step guidance, expert advice, and a supportive community. Okay, first up, the Costa del Sol isn't an official region. The name was coined back in the 1960s during Spain's initial tourism boom. And while definitions vary a little bit, it's generally considered to be the stretch from Manilva in the west to Nerja in the east, about 160 kilometers or so, or a 2-hour drive from end to end. So let me walk you through a few places we visited on our recent trip. We started in Estepona, which sits quite far to the west, and it has a beautifully preserved old town that's been carefully beautified even more over the last decade or so. Lots of flowers, pedestrian streets, a real sense of calm. The waterfront, the Paseo Marítimo, isn't packed with noisy restaurants or bars. It feels peaceful, even in the more developed parts. And while it's been polished and improved, it feels still like a real livable place. Then, if you head east, you get to Fuengirola, Benalmádena, and Torremolinos, 3 municipalities that kind of blend into each other along the coast. And this is where the Costa del Sol, as a tourist destination, really kicked off in the 1960s. And you can feel that energy and that legacy. It's more built up, more international, and well connected by train. There's a real buzz here in these towns, high rises, loads of restaurants, lots of movement. So if you're looking for energy, walkability, diversity, it can be a great fit. But in the summer especially, it can also feel quite busy and touristy. Then we keep going east and things shift again. We visited Torrox Pueblo, which is the only one that I've mentioned that's actually inland. It's not a beach town, it's up in the hills, and it feels very different. It's a bit more scruffy in places, more lived in, I guess you'd say. One morning I walked into this great old school bakery in the main square and bought a pastry, and it genuinely felt like it hadn't changed, this bakery, since the 1970s. As an aside, that's where I came up with this little kind of internal rule that if you want to understand a town in Spain, look at the businesses in the main square. In Torrox, for example, it wasn't full of cafes and restaurants and shops serving tourists. It had pharmacies, banks. It still felt like a place that still primarily serves locals and not visitors. And so here's the thing. Look, all of these towns are within 90 minutes drive of each other, but the version of life they each offer is quite different. Again, whether you're looking at the Costa del Sol or really anywhere in Spain, don't start with where exactly should I live? Start with, what kind of life do I actually want to live and build? Do you want buzz and international energy, or something quieter? Do you want to be speaking mostly English or mostly Spanish? Do you want to be near the sea or up in the hills? Now, I'm going to make a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think it's helpful when you're trying to get your bearings. Look, it can be useful to think of the Costa del Sol in 2 broad zones, east and west of Malaga City. It's not a strict divide and there are exceptions everywhere, But the overall feel does tend to shift as you move along the coast. The west side from Manilva through to Estepona, Marbella, and up towards Malaga is generally more developed. Again, this is where the tourism boom took off in the 60s especially, and as I've said, it can kind of still feel like it has that legacy. Then the east side from Malaga to Nerja has a different tone. You'll still find plenty of foreign residents and popular tourist towns like Nerja, but there are also pockets that feel a little bit more lived in, a bit less shaped by international tourism. And there are other working towns on this eastern side too, like Vélez Málaga or Rincón de la Victoria. They're maybe not as manicured as some other spots that get more international visitors, but they're very real and often more affordable. On the eastern side, you'll also find more dramatic coastlines in parts. Nerja, for example, sits up on dramatic cliffs. Now, as I say, there's no hard rule here. Don't hold me to this. There are beach resorts in the east, and there are plenty of really Spanish places in the west. But if you're looking for something that feels a little bit more low-key, a little less curated, and maybe a bit more Spanish in rhythm, east of Malaga might be your vibe. And if you're looking for more established international hubs, places where it's easier to find English-speaking services, international schools, then you might feel more at home on the western end. Okay, next topic. Now, one thing people often don't realize is that you don't have to live on the beach to live on the Costa del Sol. Yes, it's a coast, it's a costa, so for many it is about living within a walk from the sea, but some of the most beautiful and livable spots are actually 10 or 20 minutes inland by car or public transport. Take Mijas, for example, Mijas Pueblo, which is up in the hills above Fuengirola. It's a whitewashed village, very beautiful, a very vibrant international scene. And yes, it's very popular with the tourists, but there's a reason for that. It's full of charm and it's got incredible views of the coast. Or Competa, which we actually connected with even more. It's on the eastern side and it's at an even higher altitude and feels more secluded. The drive up is no joke, a proper winding mountain road. It's dramatic, it's scenic, and it takes a bit of time. But once you arrive, there's this feeling that the distance from the coast creates something kind of special and secluded. We were there on a weekday morning. There were kids playing in the square, older folks chatting on benches. While I was off filming, Yoli spent a quiet hour there while Lucia, our daughter, napped. And when I came back, she said, I could live here. So now, of course, going inland means you're not walking to the beach, and those roads, yep, they can be steep and winding. Public transport exists, but depending on where you are, it might not run all that often, so chances are you may need a car. But what you get in return is space, and often these incredible views, and a real sense of separation from the busyness of the coast, which, depending on who you are, might be exactly what you're after. Just quickly, if you're looking at moving to Spain, I've put together a free Move to Spain self-assessment. It's a simple 10-minute quiz that helps you get a clear sense of where you stand in the relocation process, how close you really are to making the move, what gaps might exist in your plan, and what next steps to focus on. It's not just a checklist, it's effectively a sort of clarity tool. And if you're like many people I help and meet, you may have had lots of tabs open, a lot of questions swirling around your head, and a bit of a sense of where do I even start? So this will help. As I say, it takes about 10 minutes and it will give you a clarity score at the end and some information about the next steps you could take to keep moving forward towards Spain. So there's a link in the description down below. Give it a go and let me see, how it works for you. So I've mentioned that driving up to the village of Competa was a seriously winding road, like really intense. So one thing you need to know about the Costa del Sol and really about much of coastal Spain is that as soon as you head inland, even just a little, things can get steep really quickly. So if you look at a relief map of the Costa del Sol, and as I say, other parts of Spain as well, you'll see mountainous terrain all along the coast. And that really shapes what life feels like on the Costa. And I think it's important to know for a few reasons. First, it means that you shouldn't think of the Costa del Sol as just a strip of beach. Yes, you've got that, but then you've got hills and mountains for hiking, cycling, different vegetation and dramatic views. One evening we drove up above Estepona to a mirador, a lookout point, green hills all around, the sea in the distance, the sun setting, And it really hit home for me how varied the region is and how important it is to know that you've got these beautiful mountains at your back. And further east, for example, Kevin, moved to Spain masterclass alum who featured in a video I made a few months ago, lives in Nerja with his wife, Debbie. And Kevin regularly goes skiing in the Sierra Nevada, just over in Granada, a short drive away. Okay, the second part about this mountainous terrain. So as we touched on earlier, this landscape does affect how you get around. So living in an inland area often means windy, narrow roads. That's part of the charm, but it's also something to be aware of if you've got mobility concerns or don't love driving on twisty routes. It's just something to think about. And third, it also impacts the climate. Going inland tends to be less humid, and depending on the altitude, you might find it slightly cooler or slightly hotter. So just be aware of that. So far I've talked about towns like Mijas, Pueblo, Competa, or Nerja, places with charm, history, and character. But there's something important to understand. When someone says they live in one of those towns, they actually might not be living in the town itself. They might be living in a urbanisation, just outside of it. When you're looking on Google Maps and you see clusters of houses with pools or something marked URB, that's an urbanization. And there's many of these around the coasts, all around Spain, particularly the east and the south. So an urbanization is effectively like a residential development, and it can look quite different depending on where you are in Spain. So we visited one urbanization just outside Mijas, Pueblo, and technically we were in the municipality of Mijas, but we weren't in the historic town. While the old town, the old center has narrow streets, older housing, limited parking, in the urbanization, there was space, private gardens, driveways, a lot more breathing room. So Mijas town might be your hub for lunch or, errands and things you've got to do, but where you live, you've got all this wonderful space. We also visited a different kind of urbanization where my friend Hanny lives, more of an apartment style setup, gated with a pool and shared outdoor areas. Or I also mentioned Kevin and Debbie, who featured in a recent video and who live in an urbanization in Nerja that's modeled after a beautiful Andalusian white village. So just know that if someone says that they live in Nerja or Mijas, it can be easy to think that they must live in an apartment there when you bring up Google images of it. But it might be that they live in a two-story home that's 5 or 10 minutes drive away. Okay, let's talk about transport, because for a lot of people moving to Spain, especially from the US or Canada, there's this hopeful idea that you'll be able to ditch the car altogether. And in some places, that is very true. But on the Costa del Sol, it really depends on where you live. There is public transport. You've got the high-speed train that connects Malaga to the rest of the country. And then there's the Cercanías, which is the commuter train that runs down from Malaga to Fuengirola and also inland up to Alora. And these are great options if you're living in Malaga City or in one of the towns that are along the commuter train line. Beyond that, there's a network of buses. And yes, they connect many of the towns, but they may not run as often as you like or be as convenient as you like. So here's the reality. Unless you're living in a fairly urban environment, and ideally somewhere along that commuter train line or in Malaga City, having a car on the Costa del Sol can make life a lot easier. Now, I'm not saying you need a car, and I'm definitely not saying you'll be living a North American car-based lifestyle if you do have a car. In fact, even people who own cars here don't necessarily use them every day. You might use it a few times a week to do a grocery run or head out of town or make a trip that public transport doesn't cover. And of course, if you're moving with kids, that adds a whole nother layer of complexity. School runs, after school activities, that's where, you're really going to want some flexibility. But I guess consider this, when you're scouting the Costa del Sol or anywhere in Spain really, make transport one of the things you pay close attention to. Ask, does this area have the connections that I need? Would I be happy depending on the bus or train schedule, or would I rather have a car that's going to give me a little more flexibility? Let's stick with cars for a moment and tie it into an important topic, which is scouting trips. A well thought out scouting trip, I think, is a key part of any successful relocation. Just for clarity, a scouting trip is where you visit an area with the specific intention of seeing what life would really be like there. And I don't just mean, hopping around a few pretty towns and ticking them off. I mean really using the time to figure out if a specific place suits the life that you want to live. Now, I always suggest, starting with online research. That's your foundation. Use it to build a short list of locations based on the kinds of categories that, matter to you. But at a certain point, you just got to get boots on the ground. And often the best tool in a scouting trip, a car, a rental car in this case. Obviously, if you're set on Madrid or another major city, sure, you can scout without one. But if you're looking at the Costa del Sol or the North or the East Coast, really any broader region, having a car really changes everything. I think it gives you the flexibility not just to hit the main towns, but the smaller ones in between, to see how the landscape changes as you drive, to poke about urbanizations, to peek over fences a little bit, these places that aren't as well connected by public transport, to check out those little outposts that could actually be perfect for you, but maybe wouldn't even register on your radar if you're just taking trains or buses between, urban centers. On our trip, we based ourselves in Estepona for the first few days as we explored the western Costa del Sol. And then we drove over to Nerja to explore the east. Sometimes people ask me, how do I rent a car? What's the best way in Spain? Look, we always just go to rentalcars.com and then figure out which is the best price for what we want and go direct to the company. Not sponsored, obviously. So guys, I mentioned a couple, Debbie and Kevin, who are alumni of my Move to Spain Masterclass and who are living in Nerja. Well, I made a video with them where they generously broke down in incredible detail their cost of living. Click right here on this video and you can see how their life is working out and what it's costing on the Costa del Sol. We'll see you over there in a moment.